Hi guys, Claudia Boleyn here. This is just a really quick disclaimer before the video begins. So I made this video on the 12th of December 2023. It's now June 2024. The reason I wanted to put this up, even though it's late, is that with the scenes we're now witnessing in Rafah, I think it's important that we look back and remember the stages that got us here. Our politicians went along, they armed Israel, defended the IDF, defended Netanyahu. They basically gave him a blank check. Voted against ceasefire proposals and used the plight of the innocent hostages as a reason to allow evil to happen to innocent civilians. And they're still doing that now. This is where we're at. And I just don't think it's right that these politicians and these people with power get to pretend that they didn't know what was happening now that they've suddenly got to their red line, which is Rafah, which is completely bizarre because evils have been happening to the people of Palestine all across Palestine. We knew what was happening, we watched it happen, and we're nothing special, we're not politicians, we're nothing like that, we're just members of the public and we could see what was going on. And I don't want them to get to, in the future, act like they didn't know or couldn't see what was happening. There have been so many opportunities to change course over the past few months and they still haven't taken it because as we speak, the US and the UK are still backing Israel, but it really didn't have to be this way. So I just want you to bear in mind as you watch this, that was made in December last year. I think about where we're at now, and if anything, we're witnesses and we need to hold our politicians accountable because we saw this was happening, and I know when the horrors really, really get out there and they can't hide them anymore and their complicity is known, they are going to try and pretend there was no way of knowing what was happening, but we can prove that wasn't the case. Okay, thanks a lot. And please check out the links in the description box, Medical Aid for Palestinians, the Oxfam Gaza Appeal, and follow as many people from Palestine as possible. All right, thanks a lot. Bye. Okay, hi guys, Claudia Boleyn here. I'm going to try and use this video just to give a quick update on what's happening in Gaza. As always, I'm using information from the BBC website because people think of the BBC as being this big, impartial broadcaster, which they're not. And I've got my problems with the BBC, but I'm using it just because if I use, like, for example, if I go to like Al Jazeera or something, people don't believe it. So this is literally from the BBC, and I want to keep talking about this. We need to document what's going on. Okay, so as of making this, the IDF are currently advancing towards Khan Yunis. Right, so Khan Yunis is in the southern part of the Gaza Strip. So if you'll remember, originally Israel started its onslaught on the north of Gaza. That's where they claimed Hamas was hiding. And obviously they've since moved on to bombing hospitals, refugee camps, ambulances, schools, holy buildings. Do you remember those days at the start when they were like, oh, you know, everyone was like, oh, they wouldn't possibly bomb a hospital, and now they're openly bombing hospitals and everyone's just fine with it? They're just fine with it now. But we were cranks for a little while, weren't we? But now they're just, apparently that's fine. Absolutely fine. But anyway, it started in the north. So they dropped leaflets, and they had no right to. They displaced the population, right? They said, basically, we are making this a military zone, which they had no right to do. They've got no right to make it a military zone. Collective punishment is a war crime under international law. And it's also terrorism. Like, so terrorism is, like, at its core, it's the idea of a group terrorizing a civilian population in order to get your political aims, right? To force change by terrorizing innocent people, which is exactly what they're doing, right? And they've openly said this. They've openly said that they're going to try and basically torment the Palestinian people to try and get them to put pressure on Hamas, right? I'm not sure how much pressure they think that the civilian population can put on. I don't know how much pressure they think almost half of the population being children, like how much influence they have. But anyway, so that's what Israel's doing. They sent flyers, and they're called the most moral army in the world because they sent flyers to say, you guys need to move because we're going to bomb this place. We've gone so far into this war now. It's not a war, it's ethnic cleansing. It's basically attempted genocide, and it's definitely massacres. So anyway, it was like, oh, you know, that's fine. They've told them to move. They were told that if they went to the south, they'd be safe. And Israel had no right to send them there, but they were told that. So lots of families, they packed up what they could carry and they went to the south. But now they are bombing the south. Right, do people understand this? They had no right to bomb the north anyway, and lots of people couldn't leave because they were disabled, or they had kids, or they had all their stuff there. Like, there's so many different reasons why people couldn't leave the north, and they shouldn't have had to. But they went. Lots of people went to the south. And now they're being bombed and killed in the south. And Israel are just saying, they've dropped more leaflets, as of yesterday, to say they need to go to the west now. They are moving them into an increasingly tight area, the people that can even go. And that, to me, and I've said this on my live yesterday, I sometimes do lives if you're interested, but they're pretty long and rambling. But the idea of compressing that population into a space like that, it makes me think of the Holocaust. It does. It makes me think of, like, when you think about, for example, the Warsaw Ghetto, and you think about what was done to the Jewish people in terms of, it didn't start with the extermination camps, right? We saw anti-Semitism in the media and Jews blamed for everything, and they were less human, they were subhuman. We were seeing cartoons of them as rats, cockroaches, they're not really like us, they're infiltrating, we don't want them here. And so the public sort of turned a horrible blind eye because of the existing anti-Semitism. And they allowed them to be treated as less than human. And then they put them into the ghettos. They didn't have the same rights, right? They had to have their own paperwork, right? They weren't the same class of human, and they were living in these camps. And if you look at, like, for example, the Warsaw Ghetto, the triumph of humanity of the people in that ghetto, like, under the conditions they were in, is just absolutely incredible. And the idea was that they were squashing them into a very, very small area, and they were they didn't just kill the Jewish people and others. It wasn't just Jewish people, the Roma community, gay people, disabled people. There's a lot of people that were killed. But the idea, it wasn't just immediate extermination. They would try and kill them via starvation, sickness. Like, they would have they wouldn't have enough rations in those communities, so people were dying of not having enough food, of being crammed into an area where sickness was spreading. And the Nazis thought that was okay, right? They wanted that because they were trying to thin out the population. That is what is happening right now to the people in Gaza, because they're being moved into a smaller and smaller place. Now, they're being told to move from Han Yunis, which is in the south, which was supposed to be safe. They're now being told to move west, but there is no infrastructure in the west. Now, bear in mind that already in the south, there isn't enough food or fuel. Sickness is breaking out. People are dying of infections. People are just dying of exhaustion and things that, like, in normal society, you'd go to the doctor for. Pregnancies, things like that. People are dying because there's a lack of resources. But now they're being told to move again, and the area is too small for that many people. Now, Israel are going to carry this out, and they're going to say, look, we're the good guys, we told you to move, when really it's just another method of murder and massacre, because it's putting those people, they can't all fit in that area. There isn't water, there isn't food, there isn't infrastructure, and likely they're going to get put there and then they'll be told to move again. And then some of the people will be so ill and so sick that they won't be able to move again, and then they'll die when Israel make that a military zone. Now, what we've already seen, horrifying images, and again, I'm gonna liken it. I'm fed up. When you see images of, like, different catastrophes in history, but let's talk about the Holocaust, right? And you see the dehumanization of people treated like their bodies, they had no dignity, right? So, like, stripped down and paraded and put in the back of trucks, like, packed in like they're animals into the backs of trucks. Now, have you seen the images coming out that the IDF themselves are so proud of all these men, all these Palestinian men? Now, I believe it's men over the age of 15. And their rationale for this is, well, we told them it was a military zone. Any man who is over 15 who is still here, so that includes teenagers, innocent people, journalists, like everyone, basically. All of those people were told, this is what we're getting reports on. That basically the IDF went there and via megaphone said that you guys have got to come out, like, anyone who's hiding in, like, the schools. And when I say hiding in the schools, not for any, like, despicable purpose, but because they're sheltering in the refugee camps, right? They're trying to hide there, to hide, like, from being killed. You know, it's like, come out or, like, we'll get you. We need all the men over 15. Out you come. And then allegedly they said to the women that the women needed to go somewhere else, and if the women didn't go, they would shoot them. No, if the women didn't go. If the men didn't come out, then they would shoot the women. So that's terrorism, right? Images of, in the cold, these men and boys in their underwear, hands bound behind their back, lined up like cattle, blindfolds on, and then packed into trucks. And now people are being identified, journalists, civilians. And here's the thing as well, like, even if every single one of those people was Hamas, which they were not,
That is not how a civilized society, how a civilized state deals with people who commit crimes. Right? If there's supposed to be this big democracy, so you have a trial, right? You hold someone to account for what they've done and you punish them accordingly. You don't parade them through the streets in an act of humiliation. And it's an act of, that in itself is a violation. That's somebody's body being exposed for the world and paraded. We then had the deputy, I believe it's the deputy mayor of Jerusalem. I'll put it on the screen if I've got this wrong, right? He posted pictures proudly of these men lined up in the middle of what looked like a big crater, like in the desert, like with, like, I think it was sand around them, in this massive crater. I won't put them here, but I'm sure you've seen the images, because I was, like, I couldn't believe I was seeing the images and that they were proud of these images. And I want to just say to you what he actually wrote openly about these images. The deputy mayor of Jerusalem said, bulldozers should be given the order to cover all the hundreds of ants while they're still alive. So bear in mind, you know, this is the language. They are not human beings and not human animals. They are subhuman, and that is how they should be treated. That is an official, that is the deputy mayor of Jerusalem advocating for burying people alive, and this is without trial. This is like, what are we even witnessing right now? It's making me feel sick. It's absolutely disgusting. And it makes me think as well, like, when we think of, in this conflict, and again, this ethnic cleansing, when I talk a lot about the children that are there, because children are the ultimate innocence. All children are the children of light. I want to put down a t-shirt, like, literally every single child in this world is a child of light. There are no children of darkness. Children are all innocent beings. And I talk about that because they are like the ultimate symbol of, like, you think you can break through to somebody, even someone who thinks, oh, Hamas have got like a massive city secretly under the ground with all the money and resources they've got. You know, they think that. They think every adult Palestinian is somehow to blame and part of it. And again, what a sick worldview that is. They'll say, oh, but people in Palestine voted for Hamas, therefore no one's innocent. So are you telling me that you'd be all right with, so war criminal Benjamin Netanyahu, how would you feel if every single Israeli who voted for Netanyahu, Hamas slaughtered them? Would you be all right with that? Like, people don't view Palestinians as human beings. But that's why I talk about the kids, because you think it will get through to people when they say, oh, they've got to do it, it's because of Hamas. Like, look at the children here and how the children are suffering. Are you okay with that? Because that's what they're doing. And shockingly, that doesn't even break through to people, because again, they've bought into the idea of them as subhuman, right? People see those children as subhuman, and they'll go, oh, well, Israel isn't directly targeting the children. It is still treating the children like they are animals and subhuman. If you think thousands of children are an okay, like, that's nothing, they're not real people, because we have to get to Hamas. And that's obviously not the aim anyway. Like, quite obviously, it's an ethnic cleansing campaign. Obviously. But that's why I talk about the kids. But in this, you know, there's this idea that we have to think about, which is people automatically think of Muslim men. Like, Palestinian, not saying all Palestinians are Muslim, but they're seen by the West, right, as Muslim men. As if, and we see this with you know, men of colour all across the world, really. You know, you see this with black kids, you know, African American boys. They're seen, if they're men of colour, right, or boys of colour, they're seen as dangers before they're even, like, adults. And then when they're adults, they are instinctively seen as dangerous threats. And that's part of the racism. Because this idea that you saw all these men and boys there, and people instinctively were like, oh, that makes sense because they must be Hamas. It's like they couldn't comprehend that any of those men could be innocent people. It's just absolutely disgusting. Right. I believe his name is Elian Levy or Levi, I'm not sure. So he's a government spokesperson for Israel. Bear in mind as well, out of these men and boys we've seen, people are being identified, like, we know for a fact we've got civilians there, we know for a fact there's a journalist who's there. These are just men who couldn't go or didn't go from the area. Suddenly they're criminals, right? And this is what Elian Levi said. He's the government spokesperson for Israel. He told the BBC, we are talking about military-age men who were discovered in areas that civilians were supposed to have evacuated weeks ago. So their crime is not evacuating to a place where people are also being bombed, Like, Israel has no right to tell them to move. They're now being killed, humiliated, tortured, paraded for the world to see for the crime of existing somewhere. Existing. Because there's no trial system here. There's no, this is the evidence for this individual person, right? Like a normal, like if things were normal, this is what someone's done, therefore we're going to put them through a court of law. We're going to see that they're punished. This is the evidence, right? There we go. That's not what's happening. This is mass humiliation and punishment. And it's humiliation of the Palestinian people as a whole. It's trying to show the world and to show them, look, the world think you're animals and we can do whatever we like. They are so bold with it. And again, now they're telling people to go to the west. They're telling people to move from the south. So it was, you're in the north, you need to move or we're going to kill you. Then it's go to the south, but we're killing you in the south. Then it's go further to the west. There is no space for them. They are being driven out. They're fleeing. They're trying to go through the desert. They're trying to get out if they can. Or they're just dying of starvation, of poor conditions, right? Of injuries, or they're being bombed out, right? That is ethnic cleansing and that is a massacre. And people buying into the ridiculous idea that, oh, it's not Israel's fault because Israel told them to move. Do you understand that they are being told to go to their deaths no matter what? There is no way, like, nowhere in Gaza is safe right now. Nowhere in Gaza is safe. And I just wanted to, like, document basically what's happening and the way it's still being... Oh, also, like, you know, I just have to say this as well. The way they treat Palestinian men. And we see this is well before October the 7th. We see boys arrested for throwing stones. They're already viewing them as these subhuman threats. If you were told, and, you know, I'm a woman, so imagine, if you're a man watching, I guess it's not the same, but imagine you'd been told, so your male family members were basically told by the regime that is killing them, come out right now, or, like, we're going to kill people. Like, you need to come out right now. And if the women didn't leave, then they were going to get killed. That decision in itself, like, having to make that decision, having to, like, could you, you know, how could you leave them, but also you have to try and survive and not knowing what's going to happen to them. And then the evil of seeing the images proudly displayed. Israel is so proud of what it's doing. Are you telling me that's not terrorism? This is a complete massacre and a genocide. And people saying, oh, don't compare it to the Holocaust. I'm not saying it's the same as the Holocaust. I'm saying there's a difference. Of course there is. There's a difference in lots of different ways. But why on earth, like, how can people not look at those images and think, oh my gosh, like, is this not, what's the point of learning about things like the Holocaust if when you see them happening, you just sit there like, well, you know, I'm sure there's a reason, or other things were worse. Like, the reason we learn is so that those things go off in our minds when we see that and we think, we need to stop this because we know where this goes. It's absolutely disgusting. I can't believe it. And, you know, people saying again, oh, it's so tragic that the poor, you know, the Palestinians being treated like this and the poor kids there, and it's because of Hamas. You know, if Hamas would only surrender, that is a terrorist mindset, and these are reasonable people. You are basically saying that those children are going to continue to suffer unless adults they have no connection to do what you want. You're fine for those children to be maimed, wounded, and killed. And traumatized. Like, forever. In order to try and get an adult group to surrender, and you're happy with that. And Hamas are using human shields. Again, people don't see Palestinian children as human. If it was your child, if there was an evil person behind your child, I said this on the live the other day, and your child is crying, and your child is traumatized, and begging, and saying, I haven't done anything wrong, please don't kill me, do you shoot through your child? No, you don't. Not if you see the child as human. You do not shoot through that child. Now imagine, would you shoot through thousands of crying children to get to somebody that is the enemy? That they have to do it. No, they don't. Nobody has to kill a child. Nobody has to do it. All that tells us is that they are okay with the deaths of Palestinian children. That they mean so little, their lives, to them. They're so willing for them to die in pursuit of their aims, and that's terrorism. That's pure terrorism. Thank you for watching. Go to your local marches, do whatever you can, keep talking. I love you loads, and I'll see you really soon. Bye.